and welcome to this edition of the MadTech Webcast. We're streaming live from London, and we're nearly in lockdown, but we're not there quite yet. But it's an absolute pleasure to have Alexis and Rich on our webcast today. I do so many casts these days; hard to find it. Podcasts, webcasts. So today we're talking about applying context brand suitability in programmatic, and in these trying times, particularly with the US election in full swing, it's really important not to put yourself against any sort of incendiary political debate. But we'll get into that in the conversation. But before we do that, I'll let my guests introduce themselves briefly and talk a bit about their companies, and then we'll just jump straight into it. So we'll start with yourself, Rich. Give us who are you? What do you do?
Yeah, so my name's Rich Redden. I'm co-founder and co-CEO of Zephyr. And Zephyr is a contextual data platform, and we focus in on brand safety and brand suitability, providing effective and precise brand suitability and brand safety targeting. And we mostly focus on video. So we work in the walled gardens, we work on YouTube, we work on Facebook as well. And but we've looked... we've had a lot of breakthroughs. We've been in the space for many, many years, and we've looked at a lot of what people are doing around content adjacency, and I hope to speak to that today. So cool. Thanks for having me, Kieran. Awesome.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Obviously, lots of stuff going on in your own country at the minute, so it's great to have your time pulling away from the political count.
Yeah, it's wild. It's a wild time right now. I'm in California, and I know we're probably not supposed to speak about politics, but I think our current president just tweeted out a concession speech because he tweeted out that they should stop counting the votes. So that's as much a concession, I think, as we're going to get from Donald Trump. And
you'll miss the Donald. You'll miss the Donald when he's gone. The man's pure entertainment. And then we've got Alexis out. Could you give us a quick introduction to yourself and what you do?
No problem. Not nearly as exciting about the election right now, but I'm following it fascinated as well. So I'm Alexis Faulkner. I was head of FAST at Mindshare UK. We've just rebranded our FAST team, which is a relief because no one ever knew what it stood for, to call ourselves Outcomes. And basically that means leading anything that's around our digital strategy and then working with our clients to look at what their business outcomes are. So how we change their share price or how we sell more of their product and that kind of thing. And that's anything kind of search, social, programmatic, SEO, e-commerce, those areas fall kind of under my remit at Mindshare UK.
I like it. Outcomes, snappy, and it gets it on tin, like, you know what I mean?
That's what we're aiming for. That's what it says on the tin.
Fast just seems like, you're continuously sort of on weight loss or something. I don't know.
Absolutely. And it's really not being good being a blonde Essex girl and running the FAST team. So I'm quite relieved to move away from that acronym.
Brilliant. And thanks for joining us. Today we're talking about all things contextual, particularly about brand suitability for programmatic. And it's quite a big topic because we are in the middle of the cookie meltdown, not too far away now before Chrome cuts off the oxygen, turns off the life support machine for the cookie ecosystem. And context is a huge part of that. So this webcast is going to focus predominantly on this today, particularly from a programmatic perspective. And we've got two people here who can talk to this. Let's kick it off. We're just talking about first sort of area you want to chat about is applying an approach to contextual relevance. Now, obviously context is being used by everybody at the minute, but is it being used in a smarter way? And I'm kind of curious how this approach has been sort of applied to something like programmatic. So actually we'll talk to you first about that.
Yeah, I guess so. Traditional context was just quite basic in a sense, so fashion brands appearing in kind of fashion and entertainment content. But really, we've had to move away from that because it didn't really, we know that people don't just hang out in the area that brand is associated with. So the joy of being able to buy audiences is being able to go and talk to people in different environments and find them at different points during their day. So really now when we think about context, we're trying to think about how audience behaves and use the context in that. So like cultural links would be really important for us in that behavior. Like a lovely example example. It's not a digital one, but was I don't know if you saw during the Ashes last year, Vegemite and Marmite got into a fight, and they were doing it in the pages of the press, but they were using kind of that Ashes culture around cricket to have an argument, but also making it really culturally relevant. And I think using a kind of context and culture together are where the more powerful things come for the future. And so we have to really understand the context of the whole page to do that, and the real terminology and the sentiment around it, which is where all of this is going. So instead of just keywords, which we're picking out kind of whether you want it to be in a content or away from content, it's understanding the whole sentiment of that page, and so that we can really decide if we want to be there and if we can engage with users there and kind of do any of our targeting and that side of things.
Rich.
Yeah, I totally agree. Look, as Alexis mentioned, obviously context is really important. By the way, we believe at Zephyr that audience targeting is not going to go away necessarily, but that when you add a contextual layer on top of it, it can be just additive. And the thing that we've seen, so the reality is we were just talking about the election. So about 4.5 years ago, our tech stack was built the same way all the other tech stacks in the industry are built, which is around the cornerstone of that tech stack is text, analyzing text. So when you hear these words in the industry about semantic technology or natural language processing or keyword technology, even though people are like, oh, I don't want keyword technology, I want semantic technology. The foundation of all those tech stacks is analyzing text. And the reason that came about is because the legacy providers, the double verifies, the IISs of the world that were around years and years ago, were doing it for bad display, is on a web page, you have a lot of information, you have a lot of text. And so it's a pretty good signal to be able to, for your data science teams to be able to train your algorithms and to look at that text. And we had the same tech stack as everybody else. And then 4 years ago, we saw an interesting behavior, which was we started seeing a lot of false positives and a lot of false negatives because we are analyzing text. Because text, when your tech stack analyzes text, it doesn't take into account very well outliers. So in this weird way, this name, this text, these characters kept coming up in lots of different spaces and lots of different articles when it had nothing to do against politics, and that was Trump. So the name Trump started appearing in things that were not associated with political things. And by the way, we've seen that this summer with COVID and illness and death, and like these words are appearing in spaces that they normally wouldn't appear. And so 4 years ago, we just decided we were going to basically rewire our whole system. And it was a pretty sobering decision because it was going to take years and a lot of investment. And we built a system that at its cornerstone, it uses humans that actually look at the content and feed data to us. And we do that at scale. So that's what I think the issue, the thing we're all going to struggle with as like, I think these outliers are going to become more common, especially in the banner and display world. And so I think that these contextual architecture stacks are going to have issues. We know in video, there's not enough text to actually make precise predictions. Like you'll see false positives and false negatives all over the place. And the thing that Alexis mentioned is the false negatives are when they say it's about something, but it's not about that. So they say this news content is about the virus, but it's not. It's generally positive. And so what happens in programmatic environment is if you are using a third party that's blocking that ad, the publisher really suffers, right? And that's the thing that's like, I'm not sure incentives are really aligned. Can you imagine if there was a penalty for a third party provider every time there was a false negative? Like every time an ad was blocked, there was an actual penalty if the ad should not have been blocked by the third party. And that's where I think that it is just, we're in a kind of a fascinating time around contextual and around these legacy architecture stacks that have been built around analyzing text. And I think it's all going to change, candidly. So, but it's a good thing. The industry needs to evolve.
Yeah.
Sorry.
was going to say, even outside the tech, it's a very manual process to do this. We got caught out a few years ago because Ariana Grande was put down as a block word because of the bombings that happened in Manchester. But now, if you went and looked at some of our clients, we found that was a latent term way too late when it's no longer a relevant piece for us to be blocking. So to stay on top of these things and to make sure that you're operating in the kind of open way and looking at all the opportunities you have in front of you is really hard just manually, let alone the tech stack that then has to behave in a way that's making thousands and millions of decisions kind of in real time. So between the two, we need to find ways that we can be much more progressive on it.
Obviously,
well, that's the thing. Sorry, I was just going to say that's the thing that's interesting. When we started looking at exclusion lists, there were so many terms on these exclusion lists that were being provided by these other third parties that you cannot keep track. The human can't even keep track of it. If I asked you, Alexis, is like Ariana Grande on your exclusion list, you'd be like, I don't know, why would that be? But then you find that it is, and so that's really the issue with a lot of these tech stacks that are associated with just analyzing text. So sorry, Kieran.
No, it's fine. I mean, clearly we're sort of only in the first innings to use an American metaphor of the sort of contextual piece. Well, I just want to move on to video, because this is where you guys are doing a lot of work on, Richard, in terms of the technology you have. Well, I want to talk about that because obviously YouTube is a huge sort of is a huge source of inventory, programmatic inventory for buyers in the UK and in Europe, and in APAC and everywhere else actually. But I just want to talk about how that differs, right? Like we talked about probably in the opening sort of preamble, we talked about that relating to display, but video is much more different. So I want to kind of curious how the technology works in video, because obviously this is where the growth is, right? Video versus banners. Like video is just growing at a huge clip. But I want to see how that works in a video context.
So let me just try to give it in very simple speak. So I'm going to talk very elementary because look, I'm not a programmer, write code, and I want to actually set the foundation. So what computers and machines and algorithms are very good at doing is they're very good at matching patterns. So that's how basically a text-based system, the text is the input on a text-based architecture. And you can write code in such a way to say match patterns. This is bad when these terms appear against this term. And that's what machines are very good at doing. So we swap that data input with actual humans that look at content. So we integrate with the crowdsourced platform, and we're asking our crowd just one very specific question, which is, for instance, let's take one of the areas of brand safety or brand suitability. Let's talk brand suitability because Forays and Garm did a whole lot of work here to talk about to understand the 11 categories of brand suitability, low, medium, and high, and they have different thresholds. If a gun is in a video, but it's in the sense of entertainment, it's medium risk. If it's not, if it's like a gun review, it's high risk. And so they've done all this really great work. Well, what you can do is you can work in, so we built a system that works with a crowdsourced platform that asks just one simple question. We say, we are going to ask you a question about whether a gun is in a video, and we're showing you example videos of what that would mean, what that would look at. And then we'll show you when somebody's play fighting, that doesn't mean they have a gun in the video. Now, this all seems elementary. Like, why would you need to explain that to the crowd? But the whole idea is you're trying to get many, many reviews from the crowd about, does this video contain a gun in it? And once you get a lot of yeses and a lot of nos, that's data that can be fed into your data science team, and your algorithms can start to replicate that. And they can start to understand it actually is a form of artificial intelligence. What is AI? AI is where machines replicate. It's artificially replicating human behavior and human intelligence. And you do that by feeding it a large sample, set of data. And so we're not talking about like 10 reviews or 100 reviews or 1,000 reviews or 10,000 reviews or hundreds of thousand reviews. We're talking about millions of reviews that have to be given. And that's why it's a kind of an expensive platform to build. It's an expensive technology to do. And by the way, that was probably over the head of a lot of people, but that is its fundamental.
To your point, like machine learning is effectively input and output, right? It's like you need data for the algorithm, which is just basically
training data,
which is just a piece of code. Viewers, don't let people try and fool you. It's a piece of code to train that algorithm, and then you're able to sort of like spot other similar gun filled videos. But
that's correct.
That leads to the next question. Can you scale that? Is that possible to scale if you're applying a lot of that human filtering?
It is. I mean, there's a way to scale it. So we patented our human in the loop technology. We integrate with the crowdsourced platform. So literally on any given day, we have hundreds of people giving us thousands and thousands of reviews, literally every day. So it can be expensive, even though we charge what everybody else charges. But this is the kind of like what Alexis is talking to is like fundamentally what we felt like, and she's a great advocate because as we listen to her speak about it, the industry is going to demand more precision. They're going to, the industry we feel like is going to we know that marketers don't like false positives where you say something's brand safe or brand suitable and it actually isn't, because then you're on the front page of the Guardian or something. Right, exactly. So there's already incentive structure to stop that. But we fundamentally feel like the industry is not going to abide by false negatives as well, which basically hurts publishers over time. And
also
that's where
discriminatory. Like what we found with those areas is that discriminatory words get put in there, which means you cut out swathes of audience that you would want in your inclusion and diversity audiences, but the people have been worried about the context that they've been written in previously. So you have to make sure it's an inclusive policy as well.
Alexis, do you have to apply a lot of your own, like taking Zephyr technology, for instance, right? And you probably are a big buyer of YouTube. Do you have to apply a lot of your own sort of input into that as well? Like, is there a lot more? You're the last line of defense between the client and the front page of the Daily Mail.
I think that's it. Like, don't get me wrong, like Facebook, YouTube, all of these places which have these wonderful, strong video content, which we want to be in, we want to be using for our brands. They have a lot of controls and they've really upped their game in the last few years since this became a big crisis kind of, 3-4 years ago. But that said, their controls still aren't strong enough for us and for the quality of the brands that we want to be protecting in that space. So they might kind of use things like parental guidance or kind of what you'd see in a cinema classification. They will do genres and things like that. But the nuance to this, what Rich talks about as the nuance, is what's our real problem in video, because traditionally you're looking at the labeling of a video, what someone's titled it as and labeled the content as, and then they're classifying it based on that. But the audio of that video might do something completely different that someone's missed, or that they didn't classify it as that point. And that nuance is what comes in. So for example, there's rules about not showing children high fats and saturated sauce content. We had an advertiser recently that appeared on a YouTube against a SpongeBob SquarePants piece. Now that was actually in an adult comedy channel. So looking at the labeling, it's an adult comedy channel and we're all fine with that. But what you realize is that's kids content within there that was hidden in there. So unless we're really on the button kind of understanding the nuance of how things are being used and what that content is, we really fall apart. And with video, that's more so because you can't just read a page. It is kind of three-dimensional in what it does. And so we always work with vendors like Zephyr and others that are out there in the marketplace to look at our own overlays to that, our own channel kind of brand safety lists, because we feel that's the only way we can really get the quality of content we want for our advertisers.
So that's the thing that, sorry,
go ahead.
The thing I was going to say, I like to talk, obviously. The thing I was going to say is these platforms, what they offer is reach, right? Real reach. And the thing that Alexis was talking about is that the platforms have done a very good job on this sort of floor of brand safety, making sure. But when you talk about brand suitability and is it suitable for this brand, you're really speaking to waste, right? And that's what as an agency, you're trying to eliminate waste, right? As a marketer, you're trying to eliminate waste. And so that's where I think it really, the brand suitability and the difference in the nuances, and we find time and time again, especially on these open platforms where so much content is being uploaded, a channel is not a great signal. Like, it's not like the old days in television where it's like, can you imagine if you turned on your TV and you're like, oh, I'm going to watch my favorite show. And all of a sudden it was just like, no, they decided not to do an episode today. They just decided to do, the creator was depressed, so they decided to do a different story talking about suicide prevention or something, right? That might be appropriate for your brand, but it might not. But that's the kind of, like, on open platforms, that's a little bit what you get, right? You don't get sort of the discipline around that programming because they're many times professional. They're the professional, right? They get paid and they make money, but it's a different kind of creative process. Anyway,
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we do need to balance that because I'm looking for a cost-efficient way to do this. So my problem is if I use a inclusion list that is very small, which I know is safe and I'm feeling very happy about life, it's not going to work for us from a performance perspective. So we're constantly trying to balance that risk and reward profile, think about where our brand's appetite for risk is, because there is no fully safe way to do this. But what we do find is when we overlay these external platforms, we tend to find a better balance on kind of our risk to reward for our advertisers and where we're finding the interesting content, which really contextually kind of works for their brand, but also is kind of safe. And on top of that, we can then start overlaying things like quality metrics. So we can start thinking that, it's not just view through rate. It's lovely if someone watches an ad, but what if they're watching the ad just to get to the music content on the other side? So they're not really watching it. They've put down their phone. They've just gone to the music content on the other side. What if it's content that's in a non-English language page? Is that as powerful as an English advert in an English language page? And so we're constantly looking for these factors to try and balance our reach and pricing with our quality and then with the risk of this brand safety piece that we need to run for them.
And also you need an outcome because you're called.
I do. I need it to work.
I mean, you can't just have people watching videos. They have to buy stuff afterwards or do something.
Well, this and it's trying to understand that the temptation in video is that you just look at view through rate because you're like,
well, that's true, rate and frequency. But I'm curious though. I know this is a bit of a cover question, but I'm just interested to know how you take that to the ultimate objective, like, because I know, like, are you changing the way you the way you use that, and then obviously then the outcomes that you're trying to do off the back of that, like how do you? I'm just curious, like.
It kind of depends on what campaign we're doing. So if we were working with someone like Zephyr, a lot of the time someone like Zephyr is really interesting with that human element to it because they can do so much more nuance than we could do in general tools. So they're allowing us to find different contexts that are quite unique or that are really serving a purpose. And in those campaigns, we're really looking more for brand outcomes, if we're honest. So we're looking for product recall, we're looking for brand uplift, and we're looking for what kind of content contributes towards that. Now, is that the audience part, the kind of contextual part, which we're working on defining there? Or do we also have to overlay these quality factors, which I've talked to, which is all around language, which is around kind of what type the content is and therefore how someone's behaving? Early doors, when Google first released their kind of performance network, it was full of Minecraft videos of kids watching Minecraft, and your view through rates are brilliant because they want to get to the next stage. But for me as an advertiser, I don't want my brands appearing in that Minecraft because it's not getting me any uplift in the product purchase. So our job is to put those metrics in to try and understand where we get uplift in performance, as aside from just those media metrics, which you'll see on a day-to-day basis, which are a good measure of kind of as things set up okay, but they're not the measure that tells me if it's successful or not.
By the way, I was just going to say, we haven't talked about this with Alexis yet, but I'm a huge advocate so she's got performance metrics. I'm a huge advocate, and it's for all your listeners and viewers too, is that hopefully the industry will embrace this idea of a suitability CPM. So then you can actually tie your price, because what you'll see is if you wanted to be around certain kind of content and all of a sudden you got other kind of content, like for instance, she just mentioned Minecraft videos where we know 70% of YouTube and some of these other platforms and video overall is watched on mobile devices. So very easy to share those mobile devices. So if you're targeting adults 18 to 34, females maybe, and all of a sudden a lot of your deliveries are on Minecraft videos, it's clearly targeted at not that audience. If you start to calculate your true CPM, it's astronomically high, right? Because it's actually removing all the waste and it shows you like, okay, what did I really pay for? So I'm hoping the industry overall starts embracing this idea of transacting off of a suitability CPM because it ties to performance, right? If everybody's thinking the same way, like, oh, I only want to be around the content that my actual audience would be watching and I'll overlay audience data on top of it and everything. I think it's a really fascinating way to start transacting.
Suitability CPM. Interesting.
Suitability CPM. Yeah.
Like, just moving on to sort of this kind of granularity, right, that you're introducing here, around brand suitability, right? Let's talk from the publisher perspective. Is this? I seem like I'm answering my own question here, but is it a way for you to open up new buying opportunities for the advertiser, right? And and because of that, you're able to kind of open up new revenue sources for the publishers. So you're kind of like taking away the sort of like the hammer sort of approach that was contextual 1.0, right? And you're able to layer in this nuance and this sort of like sort of next gen ability to kind of introduce contextually relevant brand suitable inventory. So that is it for the advertisers to give them, as Alexa said, to introduce more inventory, more opportunities for brand lift, and publishers then to make more money, which is ultimately what publishers want to do.
Exactly that. We want to remove the things that are blocking us getting on those publisher pages that weren't helping the advertiser goals. They're there as a kind of blunt tool that was helping us protect an area, but it's not actually having the impact that we need it to. And we want to find those niches that are really culturally rich or really rich for that audience, that allow us to have a different conversation and, using different creatives or using different messaging to really establish kind of that. And that's why I brought that Vegemite example up earlier, because it's where you can be playful with a brand, or where you can really have impact that kind of resonates a bit more emotionally, is what we're after. We call it mindsets planning at Mindshare, and we're constantly looking for what are those moments of engagement, what are those cultural relevance or behavioural relevant events that really resonate with that brand, and we want to find them in different places. Now, if we can open up more publisher content to allow us to do that, that's a really good win on both sides. And the last thing we want to penalise publishing partners for really well thought out kind of procured content that is edited together, but we've had to cut out because of blunt brand safety terms and that side of things.
Absolutely.
I was just to back that up, the whole idea behind this, about better precision and understanding nuance better, is that ultimately what it should open up more inventory, not less. Because even though people on these old text-based architectures are saying, okay, we got sentiment technology now, we can understand sentiment. Well, they're using text to understand sentiment. So if there's a sparsity of text, like in video, and somebody, it's a video about a basketball player dropping a bomb, right? Which is a vernacular for dropping a 3-point shot, and that's in the text.
I didn't know that. I'm Sesame Street, not Street.
Yeah, but the reality of it is that kind of language, that kind of that vernacular, which is clearly not an incendiary bomb. He's talking about a 3-point shot that's unbelievable. Like, that's the kind of like where even if you're just analyzing text alone, that like sentiment technology, natural language processing, it all will always have a lot of false negatives and a lot of false positives. And it's just so if you can do it with more precision, more nuance, it's more effective. The price of the inventory goes down, and you open up a lot more opportunities for publishers. So I think publishers will start to demand it. They're going to start to say,
"Oh yeah, I completely agree." I mean, it's more revenue, more yield for publishers if you can find ways to do that. They'll definitely. But I've got a curveball question for you here, because I like a little bit of interaction on these live things. As anonymous attendee, I think he's a long time listener, first time question poser. Thoughts on tackling brand safety on live video? Does this work on a programmatic direct basis? I mean, this is obviously a very interesting question, because this is becoming more and more of a thing, isn't it? Live video. As we are doing right now, we're coming live. Like, you can serve an ads before this or after this if we wanted it. But what's your thoughts on that? I know it's a bit of a curveball question. We're kind of going out of the thing, but someone asked it, so I thought it'd be good to ask it.
So for me,
I've got a.
Oh, go on, Rich. Go for it.
Go. No, you go for it.
We'll both back off first. I was going to say, just generally, like, live video is the kind of scariest environment for us, because you really don't know what's coming next, and you can't predict it. That's the whole point of it. So what we have to do when we're working with advertisers is understand risk profile, because for me, I haven't found any tech or tool that's going to save us in that environment. Some people are putting delays on the live video, so you'll see it streamed, but it will have a delay to it. But even then, trying to pick up the nuance in language and make it safe prior to that happening is a fear point. So what we tend to do with our advertisers, if we talk to them about 3 tiers of brand safety, anything that's live or got live user-generated content around it, we're going to put in our risk profile. So we need an advertiser that's pretty game and up for kind of taking a few more risks if we're going to put them in that environment, in all honesty. And it's talking about what that means for your brand and how risky it actually would be. So kind of scenario planning and that side of things, because some brands, it's fine. It will suit them. They're playful. It doesn't matter. Other brands like a Chanel or someone like that, that would be their worst nightmare. We can't be anywhere near that. So we have to be able to balance what the need is.
That's exactly. Alexis said it, we can come up with a probability score because basically our systems basically judge a probability as to, you know, what the content's about. So we can come up beforehand about a probability score that it will be brand safe. But all machines can do is replicate human behavior. If somebody wakes up on a bad day that day and they've never created anything in their videos ever was not brand safe or brand suitable, and all of a sudden they woke up on the wrong side of the bed and they make a determination. Exactly. And they do something crazy. The only solution is a delay, and you have to have people actually watching that stream at the time. So I think you know, obviously this is why there's lots of talk in the industry about influencer marketing and stuff. So if you pair it with the right people and there's the right expectation and stuff, and they understand what's at risk and there's an advertiser associated with it. But, you know, we had an instance in the Super Bowl many years ago where a performer went on at halftime and decided to expose themselves. I promise you the network did not know about that. And that's where delays, by the way, in network television first came in.
Hold on, was that Diana Ross, was it? Was that Diana Ross? No.
I want to say
Beyonce. I remember Justin and Timberlake on stage.
It was Timberlake was the one who exposed. I don't remember who was the subject getting exposed. Yeah, that's terrible. Yeah. Oh, somebody just tweeted me, Janet Jackson. So it's Janet Jackson, Justin Timberlake. Now I'm really dating myself.
I believe I didn't remember it.
Clearly by the way,
there you go.
Was not rehearsed.
Brand recall, obviously. Brand recall there. The Super Bowl obviously won. I don't know what the hell they were advertising. Listen, just two more questions before we sort of wrap up. One is, this is all well and good, and I know you're applying this to Facebook and Google, but do they not do this themselves? This is not something, I mean, obviously, I imagine Google just wants to sell any other crap on his platform, so like, you know, on Facebook, so they'll be happy to serve ads all day. But obviously, I take it they don't have this type of granularity available.
So for us, when we look at it, they have amazing tools that we can do lots of targeting with, but no, they don't go to the nuance of this, because if you think about the principles of what they are as a business, is they need to try, they're a publisher in some senses, they need to monetize their content as best they can. So they will put there's loads of kind of different pieces in there where we can set different levels of risk and we can set different categorization, but it doesn't do it. They haven't invested in it like the specialists have to get to this level of nuance. And in my experience, we are relatively risk averse at Mindshare, we think it's fair to say. And so we know that the only times we've been caught out on these things are when we don't overlay these third-party tools. So we push all of our platforms to work with us with third parties to allow that kind of specialist oversight into there. And it's really hard to do. It's not an easy thing to classify. Even when you think you would have a kind of common sense on what you think's right and wrong, you'll find a nuance that catches out your kind of way of thinking. So it needs these people developing the kind of specialist oversight into it.
Yeah. Rich, obviously,
I agree. 500 hours are uploaded every 60 seconds to YouTube. They've got they literally, their focus, as it should be, has been making sure that stuff is not suitable for any brand and on the platform should not be on the platform. And I think they've made tremendous strides in that area. And they really, platforms are kind of like, as Alexis mentioned, they are the publisher. And so I think most of the agencies and brands that we work with just want a trusted party that's solely on their behalf, that doesn't have anything else to gain on the publishing side and whatnot, just making sure incentives are aligned. I would like to mention, Kieran, one more thing though, is that we haven't talked about like video on the open web. And the reality is we were having difficulty in video on the open web because in the bid stream, there's no unique identifier to be able to identify it. And I'm a huge fan of what this little upstart company is doing. They're doing some great stuff. They're creating a marketplace where they actually append a unique identifier in it. So they're basically like a video SSP that has a unique with contextuals. So they have a unique identifier. It's a company called Iris TV. And I think this is going to be the wave. I think, look, all video should be transacted this way. Obviously, everybody's raging about connected TV, but we don't actually, when you can't in the pre-bid environment target specific videos and you can just target like, oh, we want all of this channel's content. It doesn't really give you that contextual control that you're going to demand in that environment. So it's early days right now. People are like crazy for connected TV, which is great, right? Because viewership is going there. But the industry will demand like, hey, just like they did in television, I want my ad around that show or that video, not that one, even though you're the same publisher. And so I think that's something that's definitely going to, because video is going to grow. It's obviously growing Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, all these platforms, but it's going to grow on the open web like crazy as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it is the platform, it is the platform to watch video.
That leads you nicely into the last question, because as we know, cookie degradation is upon us. IDFA is gone. iOS has purged all third-party cookies, or Safari has. So will context become sort of the de facto targeting solution for programmatic and automated buying? And particularly your point about the open web, right? If we think about LiveRamp and all those authenticated solutions, will only cover off about 15-20%, right? And then you've got some probabilistic modeling that could probably cover the rest of it. But reality is, context looks like it could be the de facto way for targeting on the open web. So do you think that is the go-to for most programmatic buyers? I'll start with you, Alex, because obviously you're going to be buying quite a lot. But
we are indeed.
You think about this quite a lot in terms of how, I mean, as a business who's about execution and media buying and planning, you kind of have to think about this. But is that something you think that will happen? That context will be the, I won't say the king of the open web, but the queen of the open web, because it's just as important?
I think it's definitely going to have a much bigger role to play. So the cookie disappearing causes us issues in kind of three main areas. The targeting, clearly, what you're talking about. The measurement is my bigger worry, if I'm honest, because sometimes we're using a lot on measurement.
Oh, yes.
And then the frequency control scares me a lot, because we're using that as a quality kind of metric as well to try and control our frequency and look across the board. So there's three areas we're really having to go after and have a look at. And I would say for each of those areas, there is no one way that we're going to do this, or one vendor that's going to sort it all out for us, sadly, which makes a very, already cluttered Lunascape even harder for us to navigate and look through. But what we will see is we're definitely looking at different contextual solutions. It will help us add that nuance and the different ways of targeting and understanding data. We are seeing our advertisers take a lot more interest in their first-party data, and with their first-party data, moving that to email understanding rather than cookie-based understanding, because you can still upload and use email kind of usages in certain areas. That really benefits the big platforms like Google, who tend to have that ability to match on email. Whereas it won't give us as much kind of reach across some of the kind of more nuanced areas in other tech stacks, so we have to balance that out as well. And the probabilistic data and the kind of data graphs and kind of all that side of things is also really powerful in play. And it's a bit of a minefield for us, because you're picking through the different ways you can do your targeting with your ethics around how you want to do your targeting. Because just because we will be able to use some of this probabilistic data, or we will be able to use things like fingerprinting technology, which is kind of profiling you based on the setup of your computer, doesn't necessarily mean that's the right thing for the consumers based on what we're trying to do to kind of give them the right of ownership over what they should be seen in and what they shouldn't. So we're trying to find a way between the tools available to us and then the technology, and kind of whether that's the right direction and whether we're empowering people in the decisions they're making. And I don't have the answer on where that will go yet. It will be fascinating to see kind of how Google build out their own tech stack and their sandbox for the ADH sandbox to see if that gives us better tools, because it doesn't right now. So at the moment, yes, context is looking like a very, very powerful tool for us. But I do think there's so many technical changes and kind of different entrants into this market offering different probabilistic models or different uses of first-party data that will also be playing in those areas.
Yeah, gee, Alexis, this is boring. We always agree on everything. Look, I run a contextual data platform. Yeah. I run a contextual data platform company. I'd love to tell you, yes, it's going to be, contextual data is going to be the thing that people. The reality of it is I believe that there will be solutions, just like Alexis talked about. Audience targeting is still super, super important for frequency capping and for all the issues, measurement and whatnot. And so, but what I do think is, obviously, we've heard a lot more about contextual because it'll just take a greater importance. But I think that's more because of the fact that more money has left traditional television, where brands had such an understanding of their adjacency and their environments. And to get that same type of reach, they got to be in a lot of different digital environments, right? Even if they're on a platform, like they got to be in a lot of different spaces against a lot of different content. I think the rise of contextual has to do more with the money that's moving over and the desire for marketers not to waste money, certainly to be around brand suitable environments. It's less about I mean, and it is an efficiency thing, but it feels to me like that is more why contextual is more in the conversation. It's around this understanding of like, look, we want the reach. We got to get to that audience. We want to make sure we're in suitable environments. You know, clearly any data or information that can help us ensure that we are is going to be powerful. It's going to eliminate waste and it's going to be good for our brand. So I think it comes more from that kind of strand of thinking.
Excellent. And I think on that note, we'll wrap up for this edition of the MadTech Webcast. I want to thank you, Rich, for your input today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I want to thank you, Alexis, as well, for your wonderful input as well. Thank you very much for coming on. And we'd like to thank all our viewers. And I think at this stage, I think George has been called for the Libertarian candidate, Joe Josephine, which is a great victory for the Libertarian Party. We look forward to 4 years of free living, lots of weed, and you know, good times.
I think the vice president candidate on that ticket, his name is Sparky, I think. So
I think it's really Daniels. Yeah. In fairness, I wish the best of both candidates, and for our one Trump viewer right there. It was a good innings, and we'll see you on TNN. I'll be a presenter on TNN, Trump News Network. Should be fun. Anyway, guys, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time on the MadTech Webcast. Thanks very much.